Let's go.
Welcome to our panel. We're hoping to walk out of here with an absolute definition of what it means to be enterprise ready, so brace yourself. Why don't we start with that, actually. This is a word and a term that in the 25, 30 years I've been working on enterprise-related technology has never really quite settled into a formal definition, and it's often characterized, depending on what sort of perspective you bring to the discussion, as all the boring stuff that nobody really wants to work with, or on a more positive spin, the thing that gets you paid, depending on the company, of course. And so my sense is that it's a lot of things, but I'd love, as a kind of icebreaker, I guess, with the panel, to have my fellow panelists here kind of share what they consider to be, your definition, whether it's from the perspective of the product itself, or what does it mean to be an enterprise-ready company. So, Britt, why don't we start with you?
Man, we get this question all the time. Enterprise-ready kind of reminds me a little bit of like defining art.
That's
right. It's very much in the eye of the buyer.
Right.
Having worked at companies that do like internal collaboration with some of the most sensitive data, as well as I was at Webflow, which is like public websites, what enterprise ready meant to the buyer differed wildly. And really what you start to understand is when people say like enterprise ready, the buyer is oftentimes trying to like say like, I see something in this product. Like if you just had X, Y, and Z,
right,
it would really unblock. It would make it so much easier for me to like actually purchase this. So to me, it's all about like, you're hearing from the buyer, what are the things that are gonna help them unlock the other stakeholders that they have in the organization in order to like actually use your product?
It's interesting. I like that perspective. Often, like, I would say one of the requirements of an enterprise-ready discussion is that there is a buyer that is not necessarily the same person as the user, right? So curious, Ilan, like, does it mean something different for you, or what? Do you have a perspective on what it means for the user? What does enterprise-ready mean from your experience?
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go. Is that in enterprise you have a chooser and a user,
right?
Where in PLG you have just a user. When you're enterprise ready, you're ready to basically define that chooser. You're ready to, as an organization, you're ready to partner with the sales team, and probably most importantly, the leadership of the company, namely the CEO, is ready.
Right.
Until that happens, it's going to be very, very difficult to go into the enterprise. We can talk about all the different, features that you need and all of that, and I'll save that for other questions. But essentially, when the organization is ready really to define who you're going to go after as a market, that chooser, and define that and go after and build that, then you're enterprise ready.
It's interesting that you mentioned PLG. I heard this observation shared in an interview with a guy named Adam Gross, who's a good friend of mine and a very, very smart guy when it comes to SaaS and B2B stuff. And he said something to the effect of, every PLG company aspires to be, a proper sort of enterprise business, right? It's very common to start in PLG, and as you move up market, the chooser and user might be the same, even the buyer in some cases. I know certainly it's true for a product like Canva and a few others I've worked on. You have somebody that's actually selecting the product, using it, and paying for it. And then as you get more broadly adopted inside of an organization, that dynamic changes, and you have a whole host of other problems because now you have other, a choice has already been made, right? But you have somebody else who has to assess the product that is arguably already being used inside of the organization to see if it's truly worthy of being used in maybe a more sanctioned way or a more supported way.
I think that if that's the case, you're going to have a very difficult time in the enterprise. I want to be a little
interesting. Yeah. Okay. Let's go with that before we go to Lawrence, because I'm curious. I agree.
Spicy here.
I mean, that's fine. That's what the people came for. They didn't. They're not here to talk about AI. Right. By the way, we had a bet back there as to whether we'd actually get through this entire panel without asking a single question about AI. So if that's what you're here for,
we're going to try.
Get ready.
So here's the deal. Just from the slogan that we just saw, right? Expanding TAM.
Right.
I think it's going to be very difficult for a company that's a PLG company to expand TAM into enterprise if you're going after individual users.
Right.
The way to expand TAM is to go after higher value use cases.
Right.
So this is what I was talking about as far as that chooser. You have to be able to identify someone with a bigger pain, a bigger problem than your individual PLG product solves, and go after that. Otherwise, it's just going to be a slog.
And I'm going to take the liberty of suggesting as to why it's going to be a slog. Essentially, what you're left with as a selling proposition to the organization is what I would describe as a harvesting motion, right? Like you're saying, you're already using this and a lot of people are paying for it, so why don't you pay me a little bit more money and I'll roll all of this stuff up for you, and we can assume that no enterprise buyer worth their salt would ever fall for that, right?
And I'll just follow up with the anecdotal information. Sorry, I don't mean to hog the mic here.
Lawrence will get to you.
I'm sorry.
Don't worry. You're going to get the
point,
AI questions.
I promise. Last point. At Slack, when we made that shift, we added all the security features and all of that, but that wasn't what we were selling. What we were selling was organizational transformation.
Right.
What we were selling was a more efficient, company. What we were selling was customer service and the fact that you could respond back to customers. Or what we were selling was security and the fact that you could respond to incidents more quickly if everyone is on Slack. That's what we were selling. We weren't selling to individuals saying, well, now you could just have more Slack because we have this security feature.
So in addition to capabilities, it's also, in many ways, a positioning and an articulation of what it actually means for the organization to be using the product. All right, Lawrence, so what do you think?
I actually really want to add on this point. So I think there's two ways you can go enterprise ready on these PLG motions. One is what you're talking about, which is harvesting. So everyone is just using it up. You're rallying it together and making it more secure, checking those boxes. I'd say one thing that Asana did, and then also with the PLG, that's a really powerful PLG motion, is how can you turn something from bottoms up to kind of bottoms up turns into tops down. So can you get enough momentum at the bottom to say, everyone really loves this app, look at all these use cases, but then actually ID some use cases that are worthy of deploying from the top and kind of in a wall-to-wall fashion. That to me is like one of the facets of transforming to enterprise ready.
And just for clarity, would that top-down sell be at a different company, meaning one that has had no bottoms-up adoption? Because,
No, this would be at the same company. So you basically show up and say, hey, look at all these use cases that already worked really, really well within this organization. Imagine these higher level use cases that you could use and deploy across the entire organization.
So that's interesting because I've seen, I've approached the problem in the past through the lens of this idea that in the enterprise, the enterprise buyer looks for the reassurance of other people doing similar things, right? Other companies. The credibility that you gain as an enterprise-focused company is heavily weighed around who made the first move, right? Like who adopted your product and who's paying for it and has been successful with it. And in the example you just gave of like both sort of driving a bottoms-up, user choice-led adoption, which by the way I find kind of a fundamental 21st century reality of even the most enterprisiest of enterprisey things. It's true in development products and infrastructure products with open source. It's certainly true in business applications, short of the most difficult and esoteric ones. That you get this opportunity to sell top-down within that same organization, and as Ilan mentioned, make a broader case as to what the org-wide impact is, justify the higher price by saying there's other capabilities, not just features, but also service and customer success elements, et cetera. But that you would take that customer win and in pursuit of continuing to drive what often looks like more enterprisey growth, meaning larger contracts, higher ASPs, longer duration, deals, say, skip all the PLG side of it and go to the next customers and actually make the case for saying, here's a company, they adopted us organically, we then came in and sold them. I'm curious actually if this happened at either Slack or Asana where you didn't wait for there to be organic adoption surely there probably was at least some of it, right? But that the entire approach to the customer started from the top and saying, we don't have time, we're in a competitive field, right? We're not gonna wait for you to organically come to the conclusion that our product is better and more enterprise capable. We're just gonna tell you that it is, provide you evidence of customers that have been through that adoption journey. Have any of you seen that work?
Maybe I'll say, I think of that as actually two different sales motions. So if you come in cold, you're really trying to build executive relationships and say, hey, look at the value prop. You don't know much about us today. Here's how you can deploy wall-to-wall across the whole enterprise. But that starts from a very different spot than if you came in through PLG. You actually have a whole bunch of internal champions within the organization. So how can you actually use those voices of the internal champions to say, hey, we get a ton of value here. There's some use cases here for the whole organization. Bring them actually to the table into that conversation of the larger enterprise buy.
You use the word there, wall-to-wall, which just as a pro tip, I would say that if there were ever a stop word or a thing you should definitely never say in front of an enterprise buyer of any sort is, we're here to deploy wall-to-wall, is surely to guarantee you I'm going to stop listening right now because I know what you're after, right? Like you want to get like everything, that's sort of the psychology, I guess, of the enterprise buyer, to be distrustful of anyone who's just starting by saying, hey, everyone here could use a little bit of this, right? Even if it was true. Britt, back to you, since you happen to have the unique perspective of working and bringing a product into the enterprise in a category for which there's no existing, you're kind of, it's a rarefied position, right? To be bringing something into work for which there isn't really an existing thing that you're supercharging or replacing. How are you finding the conversation? How are you approaching that, I guess, from OpenAI's enterprise product perspective?
Depends on which month you ask me.
It's a very dynamic world.
Joined OpenAI last year. In 2023, it was a very different world than 2024. Because I oftentimes like thinking about, even in this PLG versus top-down, it's like you're ultimately trying to understand, how is your buyer getting promoted? How are they getting fired? Because the more you can understand their specific motivations, the more you can play into them. If they're worried that their peers in an industry aren't going to validate something, then you're going to look dumb if you make a decision and take a risk on something. But if you have a ton of people internally you're championing, it feels like your risk is lower and maybe you get promoted. When it came to AI last year, companies were just sort of told, go use something. We're all terrified of falling behind. We talked to companies where the board was giving them budget and saying, hey, go spend X amount of dollars on AI. I've never had anything like that in my career, nor do I expect that to happen at any other point. And so conversations were so weird. It's just we were selling them their own AI vision. 2024 looks very, very different. I think it looks much more like a typical software where it's hey, can you actually prove what the ROI is here? Right. And how do you stack up against other competitors? Can we actually look at some of the risk and compliance and governance things that weren't even discussions last year? And so actually, what's sort of nice about OpenAI is I learned a lot about enterprise from Ilan at Slack, and the Slack and ChatGPT interface is similar enough that actually that path towards a V1 of what are the table stakes sorts of things was fairly straightforward. What's sort of nice is that I think there's enough collaboration SaaS tools that what is really table stakes for a V1 enterprise product can be fairly well figured out. It's going beyond V1 into your V2 and V3 that's actually a lot more challenging, because then it's a lot more about strategy and go-to-market's influencing a lot more. The first year, hey, I know exactly what the roadmap is. We just got to execute on it as fast as possible. Now it's much more of okay, we have options. Which types of customers do we want to go after? Which types of buyers do we really want to influence? And so I think the path forward is actually much more difficult than it was our first year.
I like that word, options, and maybe wrapping this topic up to move to the next question. I think in the same way that the company that is bringing the product to market has options like the ones you just described about how to approach the market, a surefire sign of enterprise readiness is the fact that the buyer also has options, right? And I think it is, extracting a little bit from the contrast you just made between 2023 and 24 in an emerging area like AI, or even the experience you all had at Slack, and same with Asana, et cetera. Enterprise buyers have options ranging from other products that might be not as capable, not as modern, might be already in use, and they also have often their favorite option, which is the do nothing, right? So one element of, I guess, of being an enterprise-ready company, I would argue, along with all the things we've said here, is to approach the opportunity with actually embracing this idea that no matter how strongly you feel about the product that you're bringing to market along with your team, it's just healthier, and actually you're bound to be a lot more successful when you acknowledge the fact that there are really good other options that are not just you, right? And to approach how you pitch the product, how you design the product, and how you deliver it. Everything about building out the business accordingly. Because if you think too much, of your own awesomeness, one, the buyer is going to notice that, and two, I think you're going to make bad choices. So in keeping with that, let's move kind of into like product design itself. I'm curious. There's a long history through the beginnings of customers using technology within their business to expect an extraordinary level of customization of pretty much everything that they use. You look at legacy systems of all sorts, including ERP systems. Really, any critical business system often is sold as somewhat of an erector set, right? Like, here's a set of capabilities, but in the end, the implementation of these products is what's going to determine the quality of the product and its success. And that's not typical of like PLG companies don't have the luxury of doing that. In fact, in order to be successful in a user-led, sort of choice-led product, you kind of have to bring a point of view into the thing that you do, the role, the job to be done, however you choose to look at it. So I'd be curious, talk a little bit about that tension between a product like Slack bringing a point of view into team collaboration, really into group chat, if you wanted to just reduce it down to the most basic thing, something that existed in a variety of likely, less cool ways before Slack. And the customer's expectation that you bend the product or you allow them to bend the product to fit, perhaps an implementation of that product that might actually undermine what you think makes it successful.
The first thing is that's important to understand is that, first of all, you will always find enterprise customers who have lower, thresholds as far as their, requirements for security, compliance, and all that. So you can always start with those, and I won't name them here, but there are those customers. Britt and I listed them early on and went after those customers first. Second, one of the tricks that I like to do is form a CAB, a customer advisory board.
A good one, yes.
And the reason why I do that, and I advise a lot of companies, and they say, when should you form a CAB? I said, when you can get about 7 customers in a room, that's good enough to form a CAB. The reason why it's important to form a CAB early and often is that you're going to get, every customer is a snowflake in the enterprise, we all know that, and you're going to get 20 feature requests from customer A and another 20 from customer B and so forth. And then you are basically playing one-to-one tennis, right? And when you put them all together in a CAB, you can have that conversation all together in a room. And then you say, look, 20 top customers, here are the 400 things that you want. Let's stack rank them. I can give you $100 each. Let's vote on these features, and let's see where we're at. And now, basically, everyone is, forming consensus, and you can say, we are listening. It's not just that you're saying it; you are doing it. We are listening to our customers, and we are building what the customers want. But that does not mean building 400 things for 20 different customers.
That's interesting. So you're saying you actually treated that exercise as a binding exercise?
Like
Because
mediation.
that sounds risky.
It was mediation. It's not necessarily binding, but if you form a cab and you're not ready to act on the recommendations of the cab,
Then why bother? Yeah,
why bother?
yeah. I agree
So
with
it doesn't mean that the cab comes together and comes up with their list of 400 items and the top 20 are these, and it's like, okay, see you in 6 months. I'm going to go build these 20 things. But at least you have that input, and at the least you should be responding back to those and saying, look, out of these 20, we're going to build 15. These 5 here, we're not ready to build yet for this reason. But you have that conversation, but now you have a prioritized list to work off of rather than, again, 20 individual games of one-on-one.
Yeah, and I think as the company matures and you have a mix of customers that are existing customers that are sort of on a roadmap train of expectations, they're influencing, they're sort of all in, they've already committed to the product, right? And so their perspective is more about what else is coming, when is it coming, and is it the right set of, does that align with what I need in order to make sure this product continues to be successful? And that might not be the same set of things that a new customer that was recently acquired is looking at, right? Lawrence, I'm curious if you have any perspective on this.
Yeah, maybe I'd say for products that are quite opinionated, like customers will drag us in all these different directions, even just from like how were they sold the product, what are some of their past expectations. And I think it's really hard to not get pulled, especially with big dollar signs attached to a lot of these things. It's really hard to not get pulled in all these things unless you are actually quite principled yourself.
That's the word I was hoping to hear, yes.
on what do you stand for, what are core tenets that you want to drive the product with, and actually being really grounded in that and what you take on the roadmap. And then second thing I think is also, if you don't start with an opinion with customers, they will start to pull you in all these different directions. So if you actually lead with, here's how we think about it, here's our vision, here are our principles, you actually end up shaping this conversation quite a bit. So if you do feel like you're getting dragged a lot in these different directions, try tuning that different approach on how you approach customers.
I love that. I think this idea of principles, the better articulated they are about your product and actually also about your monetization strategy. What is it, especially for a PLG company, like what is it that is worth paying for, especially if the product has tiers, is a very effective way of making the debates that will occur about what should we build next and how do you rationalize the input from customers, into an actual committed roadmap be less trivial, right? Like, feel like you're actually steering to the place that you want to take the product and the company, as opposed to just being like a boutique software development agency, right? Where you're like you're leaving it up to the customer to say, what should we build? That's why, by the way, my reaction.
Just to be clear,
Yeah.
I'm not proposing coming
No.
in at 9 a.m. and saying, all right, everyone, what
Here's
do
a
we
menu,
build?
pick.
Yeah. You start off. I have a whole blog that I've written about cabs, but you start off with your roadmap and your thoughts and your direction, basically, and you get feedback from that. But then you're also open to all of the requirements of the customers.
Now to like a more kind of the provocative opposite end of this. How do you know when this is not working, right?
Enterprise in general?
No,
or?
I think this process of actually kind of managing the intake of customer requirements, the set of things that the company and the product team wants to build. Like, I would love to hear within this space, like
Lawrence and I worked at a company where we signed a contract with by we, neither he nor I, but the company did, where it came with a spreadsheet of 500 features that we had 5 years to build. And we had an entire team that was devoted to building these features basically for 5 years for this customer. So that's how you don't do it.
Right.
And at Slack, we had about 1,000 enterprise customers that Britt and I, had helped win in 5 years. Of those 1,000, I think there were 5 contracts that I can remember where we had specific items called out as part of the contract, and each one was one feature.
Right. And did you deliver on those? Is that like a successful? Because there is an art, right, to like mortgaging your roadmap in the name of enterprise progress. It's a feature.
Don't do it. Yeah. If you can, don't do it.
But often, I guess maybe an example of when you've done it and it's worked would be great. Britt, anything from your experience, either present or past? What have you committed to customers for OpenAI's Enterprise and Teams product? No, you don't have to answer that, but I'd love an example, mostly because these are the things you all, as product and engineers, it's all trade-offs, right? It's never like you come into the office and it's like you're doing your stand-up or you're sort of assessing your roadmap. Everyone's like high fives all around, like we're crushing it. Customers are happy. Equilibrium state is, I've never seen it, like not for a long period of time anyway. There's something, it's part of what makes it interesting. So I'd love to hear.
Yeah, I'm generally in the like avoid contractual commitments at all costs, especially the earlier you are, just because like contractual commitments obviously reduce your ability to learn as you go. And the earlier you are, just the less you know about the future. So you really want to like be as agile and flexible as possible. I think if you know the space well, there are like some things you feel like, hey, this is on the roadmap for the next 1 or 2 quarters and I know is going to solve a ton of users' needs. And so if I tell them I'm going to deliver it in the next 12 months, and I also like doing the like, you have the right to not renew rather than the like right to cancel. Man, we're talking about legal contracts now. The only ones I've seen where it's like been successful, so we did like encryption at rest at Slack in the very early days. It was just like, we couldn't ever imagine a world where you didn't do encryption at rest. And at ChatGPT, we did skim was one of the ones that we didn't have in the early days. And we're just like, there's zero world in which we don't offer skim. And it's going to be, there's enough in the industry to tell you like, this is a table stakes kind of thing that every other platform does. There is zero chance we don't do it. It's the like, the ones that gets really tricky are integrations. So many companies will say, well, like we have this old thing we really want to do an integration into. And you're asking engineering team, like, that sounds pretty straightforward. I feel comfortable with that. Integrating always takes 3x longer than you think it will. And you'll also get like so many other requests for other integrations.
Well, it doesn't end there either, right? Like
Exactly.
it's the gift that keeps on giving, right? Like the thing you integrate with is likely to continue to change, right? And yeah.
Totally. So I think it's the one-off integrations that I think have probably been the worst contractual like asks that I've ever seen, but the table stakes, encryption, SSO, skim, those are generally pretty safe because if you're not doing those, you have bigger problems.
So the ability to generalize the request from that customer broadly, whether it's because it's a table stake feature or because you're pretty sure that the capability that they're asking for is something that will open up opportunity, with other similar customers is certainly a good way to do this. But it always, you have a finite amount of resources, development resources to deploy to this. So I'd love your perspective, maybe Lawrence, starting with you, on how do you manage any strategies on how do you account for the balancing act of funding work to, I guess, Microsoft, that's how they talked about it back then. Like really, not just saying you're doing it, but having actual development resources, committed to delivering work that is of that type, like enterprise-ready work that is in some cases contractually bound versus things that you're doing, to drive further product differentiation or even debt repayment, because it is kind of, those are the, generally speaking, the buckets. Some people call it KTLO, like keep the lights on. Any thoughts on that?
So first off, I really agree with Britt that there's probably some things that you know you're going to eventually have to do, and then some that get a little bit more fuzzy. And I think just building the enterprise roadmap is just tricky in the sense of there's actually a lot of product sense in this. Like you're taking bets that you don't have the best data against. Versus like if you go back to the core user interface, you're like, oh, well, everyone's using that. Obviously, I'm going to go double down on that. Enterprise, you're like, this big customer showed up with this big price tag to do this big thing. I'm taking a bet here. Do I think this is repeatable?
See, really compliance is a great. How long does it take to get SOC 2 Type 2? You don't know because it's not up to you, right? Like,
yeah.
Right?
And if you don't do it now, down the line, it's gonna be 3 times the bill. I can't wait for the Vanta talk actually about this. One of the strategies that we actually did, so the Asana folk in here probably know this, is we actually ended up categorizing all enterprise capabilities into a framework. We called it the marble jar strategy. And we basically said you would deposit, there are like categories, like a lot of these Work OS categories actually, like identity, user management, security, compliance, customization, all these things. And we basically said, okay, there's not one thing that's going to check off everything and make us enterprise grade. It's really about depositing in all these buckets over time. And how we're going to deposit here is a little bit of like, oh, I think this is repeatable. I've heard it enough. I'm going to deposit here. Or a customer's going to show up and say, hey, we're going to sign a big deal. We need these 2 things, and we'll deposit. And just by shifting the mindset into like, over time, we're going to fill all of these. It's really about an order of how it gave us a framework to actually.
Yeah, it's less of an if and more of a when. And sometimes figuring
Yes.
out that when. I like the marble jar strategy. Sometimes figuring out what sequence you do it in, because there's how hard is it to do, and then like what am I going to get in return for doing it now versus doing it next year. Lovely. I think we're ready for audience questions. Thank you. This has been hopefully a good baseline to maybe have the audience. We have folks with mics, so don't be shy. Raise your hand. We have a gentleman here on this side. Thank you for being the first bold person. We don't bite. It's all good.
Hi there.
Take the glasses.
Hi, my name is Diego. I'm the founder of Guardian AI. So could you share an experience where you had to turn down a feature request from a major customer, mostly because it didn't align with the company's roadmap or it couldn't be deployed within a reasonable time frame? Right, and how do you communicate this with the customer, and what was the outcome?
Who wants to take that?
Yeah, I mean, lots. For example, at Slack early on, we met with government agencies that wanted us to build all kinds of GovCloud and private hosted Slack, and it didn't work out. I don't want to mention all the customers, but there are many other customers who came to us with, we love Slack, we just want to put it in our closet.
Yeah, make your SaaS thing on-prem is a classic,
yeah,
right? Like,
could you put it on a box and I will just take it with me? And we said no. We said no to all those customers and had to walk away from a lot of revenue, but it was definitely the right thing to do.
I think as far as any other thoughts here, any other examples?
One thing I've been trying lately is just saying that we don't do contractual commitments as a company policy, that we want to partner with our customers and be able to like learn from them and be able to like adjust priorities as we go. Like partnerships aren't built through contracts, they're built through relationships. And sometimes there's that really big customer that's like, hey, legal's not going to sign off on this unless they like have confidence that we are going to deliver this within the next like 12 months. That's the tough point, right? And I have found it is remarkable how often you can get past that if you engage the right executive and are able to like bring along that trust that isn't just through a contract. Contract is the easy way out, but it really starts to like hamstring you. And so the more you can make it about like, hey, if this is your biggest customer, your CEO should be like willing to jump on a call, write an email saying we're committed to being partners with you. I'll check in with you like a couple times a quarter on like where we are on the roadmap. That time will oftentimes even go further than a contract will, and it will like better support you in the future.
And just
doesn't always work, by the way, but it's
well. But one thing that I've seen works every time, even if the outcome still results in you having to sign up for something that you wouldn't have otherwise done, is to remind the buyer that your success as a provider to them requires more than them as a customer, right? And that in order for you to serve multiple customers and be a viable business, you have to be, you have to basically build a product that works for the broadest set of customers possible. Otherwise, you're not going to be a particularly viable vendor to them. This falls under the umbrella of what I would just say is just being as honest and real as possible with the person on the other end of this. In addition to finding the right person to have that conversation with, we often forget in the course of a negotiation or trying to drive a sale that that in order to succeed, like everyone on the opposite end of you in a conversation like that has bought software before. Everyone who's on the opposite end of that conversation has been disappointed repeatedly before by vendors. It's just a fact of life, right? And if I can, offer up a final suggestion on this point, there's only one thing that enterprise customers hate more than being disappointed. They're actually kind of used to being disappointed. They don't love it, but they're used to it. It's being surprised. And there are positive surprises, and maybe some of the folks here at Google who used to work with me might remember this little bit. But yeah, there's positive surprises like, hey, I fixed this UX that you didn't like and totally, move this button around and put it where our user studies told us it belonged. And then you're like, you just created a whole bunch of work for me. Thank you. Like, no. And then there's negative surprises like we slipped and we did not deliver on this. So if you think about it that way and try to take that whole, like, I don't want to disappoint you mindset out of the picture, I think you end up having more productive conversations. Okay, other questions, please. Got Matthew here. Go for it, Matt.
So I'd say traditional SaaS have been in a framework where it was really easy to say to customers, like, we're not going to use your data for anything. Like, we're not going to sell your data, because that was kind of creepy and just a way to kind of juice things and, hurt trust. But in kind of the new AI era, like, that customer data actually does make the product better. And, and certainly can really enhance your strategic position. So how are you thinking about that in terms of customer conversations, and how are customers reacting to that right now?
Which one of you fine gentlemen want to take that on?
I mean, I can say, yeah, so at all of the companies I've worked at in the last 10 years, we've used customer data to make the product better. We had a standard contract that said, basically, we reserve the right to use your data in order to make the product better. We're not going to sell it. That's like off the table, basically, is like going and selling that data. But then there are a handful of customers that basically said, absolutely not, like, no way, you can't do it. And we developed a feature to basically, exclude those customers from that, that technology.
And there's a difference, I guess, between usage data, which is generally, this helps us understand what you find valuable in this product, and we don't have to attribute it to you. We just generally say, hey, a lot of people there's a lot of engagement in this part. And then maybe more from the AI perspective, actual customer data, like your, customer records themselves or any of the actual business data within the product.
And to be clear, I'm referring to the latter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like, usage data is like fine. Yeah. Almost no one cares about that, but yeah.
Any other thoughts on this one?
I would just say, definitely it's top of mind of a lot of customers these days. I think thinking about just at the core, how you interface with customers, good questionnaires, good answers, good, really sound mind and communication about it, obviously really important. But I would also just stress internally, be really, really rigorous about this stuff. Like hiring a good data protection officer who will really push things like privacy by design, who gets to see what can you use in a sales funnel, and actually being rigorous about those things goes a long way. You don't really have to, you are truthfully representing that to the customer, and you practice that internally.
It's either you do it that way or you're going to wait until you try to get a certain level of compliance that most enterprise customers are going to ask for, and then they're going to do sort of a full-on inspection of your practices and tell you that you need to do it, right? And retrofitting that tends to be a lot harder. Other questions?
I had a question about monetization and investment in sort of enterprise features and how you guys think about this, which is there's a challenge, which is it's easy to justify investment in enterprise capabilities if it's, TAM expansion or seat expansion or anything that helps the account team grow the lifetime value of the account. But now you have a customer that you had a customer for a long period of time, and the security landscape and the enterprise requirements keep growing over time. How do you go justify X investment in more capabilities to add into your existing SKUs that are already being paid for when you need to fund a lot of engineering capabilities to drive advancements and capabilities like you guys gave data at rest encryption or something. So maybe you're building new AI features and you need a complete renovation in your data governance capabilities. how do you think about like investment into the capabilities of maturing enterprise capabilities over the life of the customer value when you can't necessarily go back and add $2 per user, $3 per user every time you start adding more enterprise capabilities because there's an upper limit on sort of the seat side of the enterprise piece. So I was curious how you guys think about that or have had to deal with that in the past, because it's a pretty significant challenge for maturing SaaS over time, is getting that funding to invest in those capabilities.
One easy axiom there is, are they a driver of customer choice, right? Like, is the addition of that feature going to actually drive new customers? You know, is it sort of an on-ramp into your product that will help you grow into that TAM? It's not always, but if it meets that criteria, then that makes it like a double blessing, right? Because it pleases existing customers as well as opens up more opportunity. Curious if...
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's pretty straightforward in my book. It's like retention, expansion, or acquisition. Like your enterprise features should drive one of those three. If they don't, then you're probably doing something wrong, or there's every once in a while there's a feature here and there, but very, very few.
It's also crucial to not just build it and they will come. Like, you have to make sure, and this is maybe for the product and engineering folks in the room, like, it's a shared commitment between the product organization prioritizing and delivering on a capability like these or anything actually related to enterprise readiness, and the go-to-market side of the house actually marketing that effectively and driving business that makes it worth the effort and prioritization to begin with. And if that isn't working, I'd say the CEO of the company, has to be more aware of having both of those things kind of working together. And it doesn't naturally happen, by the way. It is often the case, especially in a PLG company, where it's just not very fun to start talking about skim and this and that. And then you have a salesperson who's going to come in and present that as there is like $3 trillion of revenue that's blocked by the absence of this feature, right? And then you prioritize it, deliver it, and then you're like, waiting, right? So putting in place a mechanism at scale, I've seen blockers and programs that you can do to actually not just mark the feature, but also what's the revenue. And when it doesn't work, you kind of call people out, I guess, and say, hey, you said this can't keep happening, right? Great question. Other one.
Hi, I'm Sam. I'm a product lead at Asana. My question is, seems like you all have been pretty directly responsible for enterprise-y stuff. I'm curious where you have seen pitfalls or found success in getting other teams, other product teams, R&D teams to think about enterprise.
So it was difficult at Slack. When I joined and then I hired Britt, we were I think pretty much the only two people that had any experience with enterprise at a company of 100, 150 people. And one thing I recommend when I advise companies, first of all, is to solve that problem through headcount. So like have an enterprise team so that you're not fighting every single quarter when you do your quarterly planning and your roadmap for every single feature. That's the first thing. But even then, you still need to go and make friends with the rest of the company, core and platform and all that. And what I have found, we actually rolled out this program together, is a program called Adopt a Customer. And so I roll this out for all PMs, where every PM in the organization adopts 3 customers, and they go on the quarterly business reviews with the sales team. They meet with that customer, and they start to just develop empathy for those enterprise customers themselves. I could speak about this for a long time, but I'll leave it there so we have time for other questions.
That is awesome. I like that, adopt a customer. Maybe time for one more. I think we're down to yes, thank you for your patience too. It's like, yeah, go for it.
I'm Igor. I'm building Digger.dev. So in this bottoms-up motion, you obviously have the champion and the buyer, different personas, right? But obviously you also have only one website or one public kind of view of your company. So what are your thoughts on kind of striking the right balance? Whom should that speak to more? And maybe that depends on the stage, maybe not.
Oh, it doesn't depend on the stage, I don't think. I'd say, and it's a fantastic question. Quick thought is you have to map out your customer journey from demand generation and acquisition of traffic into that website all the way to, is successfully using the product, and consider the routes that exist within that customer journey that might be different for a user than for a buyer, and a user might turn into a buyer later. It is kind of troubling how late in the game people start thinking about this, even in the most capable growth teams. So I would start with that. Treat it as the system that it is and map it out at all the stages. There's even products to do this now, but
I love that insight, mapping it out. Because one, the marketing channels are also very expensive, so you can spend
Right.
a lot of money on this doing
Was it
wrong.
worth it? Yeah.
Yeah. But then also just recognize, like, the people going to your website and signing up are going to be very different than your buyer type of persona trying to buy something much bigger. Want to show up at conferences. Website doesn't do much. Maybe they'll sign up for a webinar and a demo. But if you're not well grounded on this, you can drain a whole bunch of money in the wrong channel.
And it doesn't mean, by the way, that you need to have two different front doors to your company. Actually, it's fine to have one, even for successful PLG companies. But you just need to be conscious of what the call to action is for a person that isn't going to be the evaluator or they're the buyer of the product. They want different information. They may want to talk to somebody. And the good thing is you can measure all this stuff. And as Lawrence mentioned, keeping the marketing organization that is responsible for top of funnel demand accountable by saying, who are you bringing to the table? What actions are they taking? What is it costing? And what is the yield, right, of that? Remarkably effective, and there's no sort of linear algebra involved in any of this. It's pretty, just map it out and decide how you want it to work. I think with that, we'll be at time. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists. I think it was a good discussion. Enjoy the rest of the show.